I wasn't looking for adventure. I was looking for money. That's how most stories like mine begin. Broke, tired, and one bad week away from sleeping in my car. So when I saw the job post, it didn't even register as strange. Caretaker needed. Remote cabin, 3 weeks, all utilities paid, meals provided, $5,000 upon completion. The listing was bare bones. No photos, no company name, just a phone number and a line that said, "Must be comfortable with solitude." I was more than comfortable. I craved it. The phone call was short. A man with a voice like sandpaper asked if I had any allergies, any history of sleepwalking, or a criminal record. When I answered no to all three, he said, "You start Monday. Pack warm." The line went dead before I could ask for directions. The next morning, a courier dropped off an envelope with a map, a hand-drawn checklist, and a key. No contract, no legal form, just a small note in thin, neat handwriting. Do not touch the cellar door. Do not sleep in the upstairs bedroom. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not respond. And above all else, ignore the whispers. No signature. I should have turned it down, threw the key in a river, and walked away. But $5,000 was too much to pass up. And after all, rules like that, they sounded like a joke, a gimmick meant to scare off flaky applicants. 3 days later, I was driving through a forest I'd never heard of, guided by that map and my gas gauge. No cell signal, no GPS. The trees grew thick, leaning in over the road like they were whispering to each other about me. It was almost dusk when I finally saw it. Black Hollow Cabin. The place looked like it had been carved out of the woods itself. Moss crept up its stone foundation. The chimney leaned a little too far left. A wraparound porch groaned under its own weight. But there was no mistaking it. This was the place. There was an old red truck in the driveway, abandoned, tires flat, vines crawling across the bumper like fingers. Inside, the air was dry but cold. Dust coated the floors like a second skin. The furniture was old, mismatched, and heavy with that sour antique smell, age and damp wood. There were 3 rooms on the main floor, a kitchen, a small sitting room with a fireplace, and a narrow bedroom with a single iron frame bed. The stairs to the second floor groaned when I tested them. I didn't go up. In the back hallway was the cellar door, padlocked, reinforced with wooden planks nailed into the frame. Someone really didn't want it opened. I unpacked my bag, made a quick dinner from the groceries I'd brought, and lit a fire in the hearth. There was no TV, no radio, just the sound of crackling logs and the soft, almost imperceptible creak of the old house settling. And then, right before I turned in for the night, I heard it. A whisper. It came from the wall beside the bed, faint, like breath moving through cracks. I pressed my ear to the paneling and held my breath. Nothing. I told myself it was the wind. Or maybe the cabin's heating pipes if it even had any. I turned off the light, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was stiff. The blankets smelled like cedar and mothballs. And just as I began to drift, I heard it again. Clearer this time. A whisper, not words exactly, just sound. Drawn out, like someone was trying to form a sentence but couldn't quite remember how. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I waited for it to stop. It didn't. It whispered until I fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, there were scratches on the wall. Faint, like fingernails dragging lightly across wood. 4 parallel lines curved near the bottom, like a hand trying to claw its way through. I stared at them for a long time. Then I poured a cup of coffee, crossed light fireplace off the checklist, and added one more item at the bottom. Do not listen too closely. The second day was quiet. Too quiet. No service, no messages, no news, just trees and sky and silence thick enough to choke on. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of the property, checking the fence posts listed on the checklist. There were 12 in total, all marked with faded red paint. A few had been clawed. Deep gouges raked across the wood like something wild had tried to climb over or through. I took photos on my phone out of habit, but I knew I wouldn't be able to send them anywhere. Still, it made me feel slightly more sane, like I was documenting something real. When I came back to the cabin, the fire was still going. That was odd. I'd let it burn out before I left, hadn't I? The logs in the hearth were stacked neatly, too neatly, not how I'd arranged them. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the flames, listening, not for footsteps, not for knocking, for whispers. But the house was still. The kind of still that's too perfect, like it's holding its breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. I heated a can of soup on the wood stove and ate it with stale crackers from the pantry. Then I opened the back door, stepped onto the creaking porch, and watched the forest breathe. The trees moved in unison, swaying like a slow tide back and forth. Not in time with the wind, not in time with anything natural. There were no birds, no insects, just wind and trees and the distant groan of the old red truck's metal cooling in the evening air. Back inside, I found myself staring at the scratches on the bedroom wall again. I ran my fingers along them, light as I could. They weren't deep, but they were deliberate, curved, like a hand had dragged across, struggling for something, maybe for escape, maybe for attention. There were more now. Last night, there were 4. Now, there were 7. I didn't remember them being that long either. They trailed lower, past the bed frame, toward the floorboards. That night, I moved the bed to the other wall. The checklist said nothing about the scratches, nothing about the whispers. Just the usual routine. Check fence posts, lock doors by sundown, keep the fireplace lit. But that note, that handwritten list of don'ts, they weighed on me. I hadn't touched the cellar, hadn't even walked too close. I hadn't stepped upstairs, I hadn't heard knocking, but the whispers, I couldn't unhear them. They came again, right around midnight. I'd just turned off the lantern and settled under the heavy quilt. The fire crackled in the other room. The house sighed with the wind. And then, soft and dragging, like someone inhaling words and exhaling broken syllables. I sat up in bed. The sound didn't stop. It was coming from behind the wall again, a few feet above where the new scratches had ended. It wasn't random. There was a cadence to it, like it was trying to say something, like it remembered language but not structure. I got out of bed. I walked barefoot across the floor, each board groaning under my weight. I pressed my ear to the wall again. A whisper, a pause, and then, scratch. I jumped back, heart hammering. The sound had come from inside the wall. I didn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace until dawn, the chair creaking with every breath I took. I held the poker in one hand and the checklist in the other, rereading the rules like they were scripture. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not respond. It didn't say anything about scratching or whispering. I crossed off check perimeter and feed the stove. Then I wrote another line beneath yesterday's. Do not stand too close to the walls. By morning, the scratches had spread again. They curved now, looped, like someone was writing in a language I didn't know. Long arcs and sharp turns across the boards. One of them had crossed over where my bed had been. That's when I noticed something else. At the very bottom corner of the wall, nearly invisible unless you were kneeling, were 3 fingerprints, smudged into the wood, greasy, too small to be mine, and facing inward, like someone had pressed their hand from inside the wall. I packed my bag. I didn't leave. I don't know why. Maybe because the road back was too long, or because the cabin didn't want me to. Maybe because the whispers were starting to make sense. I didn't sleep on the 3rd night either. Instead, I sat at the table in the kitchen with every lamp on, a thermos of coffee, and the checklist spread out in front of me like it held answers. It didn't, but it was the only thing in this place that seemed halfway normal. I reread the rules again, the ones written in that strange, almost calligraphic scrawl tucked inside the envelope when I first took the job. Don't open the cellar door. Don't sleep upstairs. Don't answer if there's knocking after midnight. Ignore the whispers. I'd followed every rule to the letter, and yet the cabin felt aware now, like it was watching my obedience with mild amusement, waiting for me to slip. That morning, after another sleepless night, I decided to poke around the cabin in daylight. Not in defiance exactly, more like desperation. I couldn't take another night without answers. The upstairs was first. The staircase groaned under my weight. The 2nd floor was colder, dustier. There were only 2 rooms, one door slightly ajar, the other sealed shut with a nailed wooden crossbar that looked decades old. The open room was a bedroom, nearly identical to the one downstairs. Same iron bed frame, same floral wallpaper peeling in long curls, same mothball stale quilt. But on the floor, half buried under a fallen picture frame, was a bundle of papers tied in twine. I pulled it out carefully. The paper was brittle and yellowed, pages of what looked like maps, crude sketches, circles with marks like tree lines or elevation. Not one of them resembled the terrain outside. They didn't match the layout of the woods, or any real geography. I might have dismissed them as nonsense, except each one had a single black dot drawn somewhere on the edge of the paper, and next to the dot, tiny scribbled letters, "It started here." Another read, "Too deep to dig," and the last, "Never let it finish the word." I flipped them over. On the back of one was a list, familiar but longer. Don't answer if it knocks. Don't follow the humming. Don't let it speak its name. Don't stay after the 7th scratch. Don't feed it your voice. Don't dream here. Below the list was a circle. Inside it, a shape like an eye, or maybe a mouth. I folded the papers and shoved them into my jacket pocket. I didn't want to look at them anymore. Downstairs, the house had gone too quiet. The fire had gone out. The air had a strange taste, metallic, like blood or burnt dust. And in the corner of the living room, beside the fireplace, the scratches had returned. Not on the wall this time, on the floor. Longer, deeper, dragging from the baseboard toward the center of the room like something had tried to crawl out. That night, I locked every door, every window. I pushed the heavy dresser in front of the cellar door for good measure and built the fire twice as big. The whispers didn't wait until midnight. They started just after 11. Different this time. Urgent, rhythmic, like chanting. A child's voice repeating the same syllables again and again just beyond the far wall. Na, ve, lo, na, ve, lo. I clamped my hands over my ears and rocked forward, counting to 10, then 20, then 50. But the voice didn't stop. At exactly 12:01, the fire flickered. Not wavered. Flickered like a strobe. The shadows on the walls twisted into shapes that didn't belong to furniture. And then came the sound I'd dreaded most. Knock. One. Slow, hollow knock at the front door. Knock. Again. The voice in the wall stopped. Knock. Then silence. I waited. 10 seconds. 30. Then tap on the kitchen window. That wasn't in the rules. I stayed seated. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tap came again. Then a voice, soft as breath. "You're not supposed to be here." It was a girl's voice, young, calm. Then another whisper, this time from behind me. "You opened the upstairs." I turned instinctively. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled wrong, sweet and rotten, like a flower wilting in fire. I grabbed the bundle of maps from my pocket and laid them on the floor, desperate for context. The pages didn't shift in the firelight, but one line on the back, in faint pencil, seemed to burn brighter. "It learns from silence. Speak, or it will." The knocking didn't return, but the voice did, over and over for the rest of the night. "Na, ve, lo," whispers, chanting, a word that was almost finished. Almost. I didn't speak at all the next morning, not to myself, not even a muttered curse when I burned my fingers trying to get the stove working. It wasn't fear, it was caution. After reading that final rule, speak or it will, I didn't want to test which side of silence fed the thing whispering in the walls. I tried to keep busy, cleaned the floors, rechecked the perimeter posts. Every one of them now had those same curved gouges I'd seen days ago, deep and deliberate. I noticed something else this time. Some of the scratches were etched into stone, not just wood, not claw marks, not an animal. Writing, some kind of script I couldn't read, but my stomach recognized it before my mind did. My brain wanted to call them letters. My gut said, teeth. When I got back to the cabin, the front door was open. Not wide, just ajar. I froze on the porch, cold sweat blooming down my back. I'd locked it, deadbolt and all. I remember the way the key turned, gritty, stiff. I remember testing the knob twice before leaving, but it was open. I pushed it open with the toe of my boot, staying outside the frame, waiting for something to lunge. Nothing did. Inside, the fire had been relit, and in the center of the table, like it had been waiting for me, sat a new rule sheet. Different paper. Glossier. No handwriting. This one was printed. Clean, centered text. New revisions to protocol. Black Hollow Station 12. The cellar must now be monitored hourly. You must dream once before departure. The name must never be repeated out loud. The name must never be written down. The upstairs is now permitted. I read it 3 times, waiting for it to dissolve into nonsense. It didn't. At the bottom of the sheet was a symbol, an eye made from 3 concentric circles, with a single black line running through it vertically. I'd seen it before, on the back of one of the maps. I didn't know what Black Hollow Station 12 was, or who was issuing revisions, but the implication was clear. Someone or something was watching, recording, changing the rules, and now they wanted me to dream. That night, I didn't light the fire, I didn't eat, I didn't speak. I laid in the bedroom, fully clothed, every muscle tense, trying to not sleep. But it crept in anyway, like fog under a door. I dreamt. At least, I think I did. In the dream, I was standing in the woods behind the cabin. The trees were taller, wrong. The bark pulsed like it had veins. The moon above was too low, too red, and I wasn't alone. A figure stood among the trees, motionless. Its body was thin, inhumanly so, stretched. Its face looked sculpted from wood but warped, like it had melted and reformed. Where its mouth should have been was a knot in the grain. That knot pulsed, and then it opened. The voice that came out wasn't made of words. It was rhythm, like breath echoing through a flute carved from bone. But I understood it. You are here. You are chosen. You are the door. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't work. I looked down and saw that my hands were not hands anymore. They were grain. My arms had become branches. My skin, bark, my mouth was gone. The thing reached out with a long, root-like finger and touched my chest, and I woke up, gasping, sweating, screaming. It was still night, barely 2 a.m., but something was different. The wall across from my bed, where the scratches had been, was split. A crack had opened, thin and vertical, like a seam in the wood had been forced apart, and from that seam came breath, warm and slow, inhaling, exhaling. The house was breathing. I backed out of the room, ran to the front door, locked, not jammed, locked from the outside. I turned and heard it, just behind me, at the edge of the hallway. A single whispered word, one I understood now. Nave lo. It had finished the word. After it said the word, the air changed. It became thick, like syrup pulled through a straw. Every breath tasted old. Every sound felt distant. Even my heartbeat, normally a comfort, sounded wrong, out of sync, like it was beating in someone else's chest. I backed down the hallway, eyes fixed on the cracked wall in the bedroom. The seam had grown wider, splintered outward like something had been pushing from the inside. That breath, that steady inhale, exhale, hadn't stopped. I tried the front door again, still locked. I shouted for the first time since I arrived, not out of desperation, but to test something. I said the first word that came to mind, just to hear it bounce off the cabin walls. Nothing echoed back. No voice, no reply, no cabin. The air swallowed my voice like a mouth. And then, the walls whispered back. It didn't sound like speech at first, more like rope tightening, grain shifting. But there were syllables buried in the creaking wet ones, like words spoken through waterlogged wood. It repeated the name. Na, ve, lo. But now it wasn't whispering to me. It was whispering through me. The same breath that passed through the wall was in my lungs. I could feel it vibrating in my ribs, like a flute hollowed into my spine. And then, as if to confirm the nightmare, the cabin spoke. Not aloud, not in sound, but through the wood. One of the wall panels in the living room pulsed outward, like something behind it was trying to exhale through knots and boards. A nail popped from the plank with a soft metallic whine. Then another. The boards shifted, bent, opened, and behind them, where insulation or brick should have been, was a narrow passage, a hallway, long, dark, earthen. I didn't want to enter it. I wanted to run, to scream, to break a window and throw myself into the night. But the cabin had rewritten the rules. The fire now stayed lit without me. The cellar was no longer sealed. The house wanted me to go deeper, and I was already in too deep to resist. So I stepped inside. The walls of the hallway weren't made of wood, not anymore. They were slick with something cold and soft, like skin after a bath. The deeper I walked, the more the texture changed, grooved now like muscle or bark. Something natural, but wrong, like if a forest had grown under the house and remembered how to breathe. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat. At the end of the hallway was another door, not wood, flesh. Its surface rippled slightly like it was reacting to my presence, and carved into the center of it, in deep, ritualistic gouges, was that symbol again, the eye with 3 concentric circles. As I stared at it, the air in the hallway shifted again, warm, sweet, inviting, like the scent of cedar mixed with something human, skin warmed by the sun. It was familiar. Then I heard her, the girl's voice from before, but now it wasn't outside. It was inside the door. Please, please open it. I can't hold it much longer. Her voice was cracked with strain, trembling beneath layers of exhaustion. I reached out. I wasn't going to open it. I just needed to touch it, to see if it was real. But as my fingers neared the surface, I heard another voice. Not hers. Older. Male. "You are the final key." Then dozens more voices followed, layered, discordant. "You are the mouth. You are the bridge. You are the door." I yanked my hand back, gasping. That's when I noticed the cracks forming in the walls of the hallway, splinters cutting across the meat-colored surface like fault lines. The entire passage was shifting, breathing faster now, urgent. The girl screamed. A low, warbling sound exploded from behind the door like a howl swallowed and replayed in reverse. And then the door opened a fraction, just enough to see an eye. Not human, not an animal. Round and full of static, like a TV screen had been stuffed into a skull and left on a dead channel. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned and ran, slipping on the slick hallway floor, scraping my arm against a wall that pulsed with pain not my own. As I burst back into the cabin, the air ripped with a roar, not from behind me but from within the walls. The house screamed, and the voice followed me out. "You are already open." The scream echoed long after I reached the living room. It wasn't a sound you could describe. It was a feeling. It pressed against my teeth from the inside. It rattled behind my eyes. It made the cabin feel smaller, like the walls were bending inward, pulled toward some enormous thing breathing behind the wood. I fell against the table, knocking over the lamp. Sparks flew as it shattered. The room plunged into darkness, but I could still see. Not with my eyes. The cabin was lighting itself from within. The wood glowed faintly, veins of light pulsing through the grain like bioluminescence in a corpse. I could see the walls breathing again, deeper now, faster. The door to the hidden hallway hadn't closed. It had grown, stretched wider, pulsing at the edges. The eye carved into it now blinked, slowly, the way an animal does before it pounces. I ran for the cellar. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the one door the original rules had really wanted me to stay away from. And now, after everything else had changed, it was the only one that still remained sealed. Maybe it was the last boundary that hadn't been crossed. The dresser I'd shoved in front of it was gone. Not moved, gone. The padlock on the cellar was snapped in two. The wood around the frame was warped outward, like something had pushed up from below. It wasn't keeping me out. It had been keeping something in. I reached for the door handle. Cold, wet. I turned it. Inside, a staircase spiraled down into blackness that felt thick. Not just dark, but heavy. The kind of dark you don't see through because it's alive. And it was humming. The same tune I'd heard the walls whisper weeks ago. The same cadence that built the name Nave Lo. Except now the name had grown. Now it had language. From deep in the cellar came voices, hundreds of them, chanting. Words I couldn't understand. Words that wanted to be understood. And underneath the chant, the girl's voice again. Weaker. "Please, you have to close your mouth." I took one step down, then two. Each stair pulsed under my foot, like muscle reacting to pressure. By the third step, my nose started bleeding. By the fifth, my teeth ached. The cabin above groaned, and then I saw it. A vast, impossible chamber at the bottom. The walls were lined with faces, not carved, grown. Dozens of them, Men, women, children, stretched across the meat walls like masks, their mouths open in silent agony, their eyes locked in unending stares. And in the center, a circle, drawn in ash, unbroken. Inside it, curled like a discarded puppet, was a girl in a faded blue sweater. She looked up, not at me, but at the ceiling, like she was listening to the house. "She's still keeping it closed," a voice said behind me. I turned. Mr. Sandpaper voice, the man who'd hired me. He stood at the top of the stairs, just inside the cellar door. His face was wrong, rubbery, like a wax figure left too close to heat. His smile didn't match his eyes. "You followed the rules better than most," he said. "That's why it wants you." I opened my mouth to speak. He raised a finger. "Don't say it," he warned. "It needs to be heard. That's how it finishes itself." He walked down the stairs slowly, the flesh of the steps sucking at his boots. "She's been down here 72 days, talking backwards, singing nonsense, trying to confuse it, delay it. You're here to relieve her." "No," I whispered. The girl looked at me now. Her lips were cracked, her eyes wide, but there was no madness in them, just grief and exhaustion. "I can't hold it anymore," she said. And then the walls of the cabin shook, splintered. Above, I heard a window shatter. Then another. The house was breaking itself apart. "You can step in the circle," the man said. "Take her place. It will honor that." I looked at the girl, then at the faces on the walls, then at my hands. They were changing again, wood grain bleeding through skin. "You're already open," the man whispered. The girl screamed as the ash circle cracked beneath her feet. I didn't think so. I ran. I didn't go up the stairs. I fell on them, clawing, gasping. The man didn't chase me. He only watched, smiling, like he already knew how this ended. When I reached the front door, it was unlocked, wide open. Outside, the forest had changed. The trees weren't trees anymore. They were mouths, hundreds of them, open, waiting, and behind me, the house spoke my name. Final entry, unknown date. I'm still in the woods, still running. I don't know what's chasing me or if I'm even moving at all, but sometimes, when it's quiet, I hear the house whispering, and I swear, sometimes the trees answer.